All right, welcome to the final, hopefully, I got to get these done today, the final paint-along Celtic bust session. Thank you for those of you who have been waiting for a while. I know I'm about half an hour late getting started off of when I actually started the stream. I basically hit start streaming and walked 3 feet away from my computer, and my boss called me on the phone. So we had a key part of our team who informed us yesterday that he's taking a different job. And so we are scrambling to try to fill in and cover for what we need to do in the next month, because we've got all these huge deadlines and things that are coming up. So an already stressful summer is getting a little bit more stressful, and so that was what that was about. So I'm sorry that I couldn't get off quicker. Had a lot of strategic planning to do. So I see that Heath is here. Good old faithful Heath. Love you, man. You're always here for me. And Lena, Aurora in a bag, is here. Or Aurora in bag, I guess. But Lena, I'm very, very happy to see you here. I'm happy to be streaming at a time that you can come. Usually I'm streaming when it's the middle of the night for you. So I'm very, very happy that you're here. Yes. So let's kind of take stock of where we're at and where we're going. So first off, it's getting actually harder to tell the difference between the done ones and the not done ones now. So we're working on finishing up these. So these are the done sample versions. This is what we're shooting for. We're getting pretty close to being done. 3 o'clock in the middle of the night is when I stream for her most of the time. So this is where we're at now. What I'm calling the Celtic Clan Chief is pretty close to being done. Last time we did about half of the metalwork on the sword. And so to finish him up, we got to finish the metalwork there. We got to finish the little buttons. And then he's going to be pretty much done. Depending on when I actually finish everything else and what time it is, I'm thinking about doing face paint on these two models to kind of have a different vibe going with these two. Sorry, my face is a little dark. It's very, very bright behind me, so the camera is compensating by darkening me. That'll probably lighten up as the stream goes on. We've got the other bust here, the Celtic Warrior. So he also needs all his buttons and things done. His hair has been highlighted up and all the texture and stuff added. So we've got to do a bunch of glazing and bring that back into a reddish brown. And we have to do his axe. And then we'll also do some face paint on him if I do it on the other one. So that's where we're at. What I'm going to do is, because where we stopped last time was the metal, I'm just going to pick right up where we left off there. So we had done all the highlighting, and I had done some initial glazing to help tie things together. So now we're going to start the shading. And as I had said yesterday, it was Thursday, the Steampunk in Miniatures book from Scale 75, if you purchase Scale 75 paints, this is a really, really great resource that kind of clues you in on some of the best ways to use them and how the artists who do their in-studio work use the paints. Even if you don't use Scale 75 paints, there's still really, really great stuff in this. But for the non-metallic metal on these models, I'm using the non-metallic metal guide that's in this book. So here's like the color breakdown. So we basically worked our way up through the base, first highlight, second highlight, and third highlight colors. We're going to start going in the other direction now. So the first shadow color is the SC12. That is Gobi Brown, I believe. Yep. We just hit, so it's 9:30 here. I was watching the news. We just hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit already for today. What is that Celsius? So 100 degrees Fahrenheit to Celsius. So we just hit 38 degrees Celsius and it's only 9:30 in the morning. We're expected to get up to probably around 110 today. The humidity's creeping in because we're in our monsoon season. We have a storm system kind of brewing around in part of the state. So we'll probably get up into the low 40s Celsius. Did I put too much paint in here? Something you have to get used to, the warmer temperatures here. That's for sure. But every house that's here has central air conditioning. So inside my house, it's a nice 78 degrees. Except this door is radiating heat at my back, so we'll see how sweaty I get this morning. Move to one of the poles. So you like it really cold, huh? So we mixed up a glaze of this goapy brown color, and I'm just going to be starting to establish these shadows. So remember that when we're doing these glazing passes for the shading, or shading passes really, you want to move your brush away from the highlight areas and towards the recesses. Pull that paint towards where you want the shadows. Helps to create smoother transitions between the two areas, because as you pull as you move your paintbrush in that direction, it pulls more of the pigment, and so the pigment will tend to gather at the end of your brush stroke. It's very subtle when you're working with paint this thin, but it's just over several passes it becomes more effective. The first day with frost is your favorite day. So where I live, we have maybe about 4 or 5 days a year where the overnight temperature drops below freezing. And everybody freaks out here and they cover all their plants because the plants will die. Because here we actually have plants that just live all year round. Because it never gets that cold. But you cover all your plants, then the warmth from the ground will keep them from freezing overnight. +30 is rough. It's rough to live in a place that's always above 30 degrees Fahrenheit. I think I made a comment on your video, about your video the other day, Heath. You were in the backyard playing with your kids with the bubbles. playing with your kid, your family. Like you were wearing jeans. It's like, man, I cannot imagine wearing jeans this time of year. One more pass. Gotta let it dry. So we'll start mixing up our... Hello, Diego. Had a little kitty visitor. It's been a cool stretch for me, mid-70s. That's winter for us. That's what the high temperatures get up to most winter days. It's into the 70s. All right. So for the to start shading the sword, we're going to do a 50-50 mix of graphite and one of these days I'll get my paints reorganized and they'll stay that way for a day or two. Yeah. Anthracite gray. So we'll do a 50-50 mix of these two. Yeah, it's definitely a different world living in the desert. And I mentioned it on stream last time too, but somebody was kind of asking, like, what do you do? What do you do when it's this hot outside? Like, how do you even survive? Basically, you just have to flip your thinking for what most of the rest of the world does, which is, spring and fall are fine. Winter, you tend to just kind of stay inside, do lots of indoor activities because it's just too cold to go outside and do stuff. And then the summer, you spend a lot of time outdoors, enjoy the climate. Everything's just flipped here. So summer, you just stay inside and do all your inside activities where you have the air conditioning. And then the winter is when you go outside and enjoy the climate. All the people from the cold places come and spend the winter in Arizona. We call them snowbirds. The population of the Phoenix area swells a bit in the winters. Somebody posted a meme the other day that was pretty funny that I saw. It was like outlines of different shapes in the United States, and they were like anthropomorphized or whatever. They made like humans, and they were talking to each other, and they're like, "Man, where's Arizona? Have you seen Arizona lately?" Like, "No, I haven't seen him." "Wait, I know how to find him." And then one goes, "Boy, it sure is hot here." And then they show like the Kool-Aid man coming through the wall. State of Arizona guy busts through and he goes, "Hot? You don't even know hot." And then it's like, yes, it's common for people from my state to always chime in when everybody else is complaining about the heat. And then they just go, "Do you know what temperature it is here?" It's usually, it is hot, but it's, because we don't tend to have high humidity, it's not too bad. Where it gets bad is usually August is the worst. We're coming up to it now. Because we get a little bit of a spike in the humidity. And so usually it's pretty dry, which makes the heat pretty bearable because you sweat and it just evaporates. You cool off quite a bit. But as the humidity starts to spike, it gets pretty brutal. Because then you feel every bit of that temperature. 16. All right, so I'm going to add a little bit of Eclipse Gray into our gold color. Sounds good. Exactly. Do you know how cold it gets in Minnesota? It's just the game that we all play. Basically, you know, during the winters, I get to make fun of all of you guys because while you're facing sub-zero temperatures and it's snowing and you can't drive on the road because it's icy and you know all that stuff, and I'm outside like watching a hockey game on my iPad sitting in a hammock by the pool. And then in the summer, when I'm like, I can't go outside because you can't touch any surface on anything without melting your hands off, and you guys are all enjoying a nice 75-degree summer day, you get to make fun of us. It all just comes around. Now, then there's people in San Diego who are like, well, it's just nice here all year round. I guess our comeback to them is, yes, but it costs $300,000 for a 600 square foot home. "35 feet of snow." Is that your annual total, or are you just joking about how deep it gets sometimes, or how much falls? Back, that was quick. All right, I gotta make this a little darker. Start working on some more passes on the sword. Sounds good. Good luck with that, Heath. I want to add a little bit more. The anthracite gray. Starting to get there. Just about perfect. I need to go back and brighten up the extreme highlights on this guy, but we're just pretty much there. One thing I'm going to do is take keep these all more organized. Yeah. So take a little bit of that Eclipse Gray and Gobi Brown. I just need a little bit thicker consistency here. Use my fine detail brush to paint in some of those little like demarcation lines between the sections. And I don't usually paint this early in the day. After having my strong cup of coffee for the morning, my hands are a little more shaky than normal. Hopefully that passes before too long. Ooh, that's not good. Got a little bit of a dark spot right where I want highlights. So nice thing with the glazes is because it goes on pretty thin, you can usually if you just get a little bit on there like this, you can gently work it off, at least most of it off, with just some water and a little gentle scrubbing. And that way it'll just take off that top layer. All right. Actually, so take a little of that anthracite gray and abyssal blue, which is like a really dark gray blue. This will be our shade color on the... I didn't pre-shake all my paints today in my paint shaker. I'm getting some of that snot that comes out. So most of these do have 2 small agitators in the bottles. The scale 75s are really thick out of the bottle, especially their traditional line, the scale colors line. So yeah, I have 2. And one of the things that you'll find sometimes too is that the glass agitators don't really work very well in them because glass is much lighter. And so if you put glass agitators in, they tend to just like sit in there. They don't really agitate very well. So I use metal, which I know is typically a big no-no, but I am careful to use the ones that are made by MIG. And they make true stainless steel, not just coated stainless steel, but true stainless steel ball bearings. And they actually put them in their paints that they sell. So they're pretty good. I've had them in most of these bottles for 2 years and 0 evidence of rust. So those are definitely my recommendation if you're wanting that. I also have a nail polish shaker that I use to actually shake the paint because, again, scale 75 colors need a lot of shaking. So I usually use that. It's just very loud to do on stream. Kind of annoying probably to listen to. But it helps a lot, saves the elbows and the wrists. One more darkening. I'll do one more glaze here. Well, probably 2 passes, but one more glaze color. And we'll be done. Well, I'm going to go back and add a couple little highlight spots on the gold, but also on the sword too. we were using white sands, I believe, for the highlight on the... Nope, not white sands. Tenaire yellow. Yeah, what you'll notice, like, if you use metal ones that start to mess up your paint, like with these clear bottles, you'll start to see like a pocket of discoloration happen wherever the ball is sitting. So like around the bottom, you'll start to see the rust, and then you know that you're in trouble. Yeah, I was telling the story before, but when I was in college a long time ago, I wanted to try out Vallejo. I had just been using the Citadel Games Workshop colors, and I wanted to try out Vallejo, and I bought their entire line. And people had told me about agitators, and you should have agitators in there. So I went to the hardware store and I got stainless steel ball bearings, threw them in every one of those bottles. What I didn't know is they were just like chromed. So they just had the stainless steel on the outside, but in the core, they were lead or whatever the core was. And so it must not have been a perfect coating, because they rusted in every single one of my Vallejo bottles, and I had to end up throwing out an entire line of paints because they were just ruined. That was not a happy day. So we got that, and for the sword blade, a little bit of nacre mixed with a little bit of white. That was my one and only foray really into Vallejo paints too. I never really collected them again after that. It wasn't their fault, but I never reinvested in the line. I guess I have a couple, but so just using that white and nacre mix to highlight, reestablish that extreme highlight on the sword blade edge. And I'm using this Tenaire yellow. To reestablish a little bit of where the brightest spots on the gold color should be. It'll help to sell that, the way the light hits the sword that we've established through our non-metallic metal. There we go. Pretty good, I'd say. Not to toot my own horn. So Heath's wondering if anybody's doing anything fun this weekend. So it's a fairly typical weekend for me. Lately that means work. So I'll finish these busts and then I got a couple hours of work I'm going to do later today. And then tonight I'm going to go see my parents. We're going to go out to dinner and go see a play. So that'll be fun. And then tomorrow, normal rock climbing. I will probably skip streaming tomorrow since I've been doing so much streaming the last few days. I probably will skip tomorrow and do more work. Maybe play a little bit of Banner Saga. Banner Saga 3 just came out, which is super exciting. Love those games, so really excited to get into the third installment and start playing that. I love how they do the... I don't know if you are familiar with the game, but it's kind of like, I always like to say it's a mixture of a turn-based combat game and Oregon Trail. It's kind of a mixture of those two with a strong RPG element in it. But what's really neat is that you make decisions along the way, like, just through conversations or decisions like paths that you decide to take and things. And the decisions that you make have huge implications to the storyline. And so if you play through all 3 games and you load your saved game from the previous version, then it keeps with all of the decisions that you've made along the way. So like there's still things here in the 3rd game that are going to be affected by choices I made at the beginning of the 1st game and throughout the 2nd game, and which is really, really cool how they've done that. All right, I'm going to start off with black on these buttons just to kind of help to establish all the separation between the buttons and the other things around them. Thanks, Heath. Always Johnny on the spot with the getting links up in the chat. So if you're interested in learning more about Banner Saga, it's one of my favorite video games of all time. I've actually played through the first 2 games 3 times over the course of the last few years. But I also like them. They're very, the world that they've created is just amazing. A lot of those types of games, I just click through all of the dialogue because I don't really care. I just want to get to the next interesting part of the game. Usually the dialogue is just sort of ancillary. But the world that they've built is so compelling that I just read every word and really, really get into all the characters and setting. One of the other things I really like, if you're playing the game and you click on the world map so you can kind of get a sense for where your characters are in the world, you can actually scroll all over the place and check out all the features of the world and descriptions of the different regions and things that happened, even if they are never referred to or don't come into play in the story. I mean, that's kind of how rich the world is that they've created. They've already got it built out even beyond the scope of the game. Plus the art style is really cool. It's like a 2D cell shaded art style. They did a Kickstarter for a board game version a couple years ago that I backed, and I have the miniatures. I painted all the good guy miniatures to look like how they look on the cards. Try to capture the video or the animation style of the video game. And I really went to town with the Thane model, who's got a banner. And so I did the Banner Saga game logo on his banner. That was a lot of fun. Board game's pretty cool. It's a cooperative 4-player game that it's a cooperative 4-player. The board game part is a cooperative 4-player game, and I think it works best playing with 5 players and having somebody play like a DM or a GM role who does a little bit of extra research on the world and kind of runs the game, because it's got rules for how the players themselves run all the decision making and the combat. There's like an automated combat system with the bad guys. But I think it's better to have somebody running all that and kind of putting more life into the way the decisions are made, making it a little bit more like a role-playing game. We've done that a little bit, and it's really fun. But I love the way that the concept of how the game is designed, because although it's cooperative, you each play different roles in the army. So somebody is the war leader, who's kind of the general in charge of everything. Somebody's the Thane, who's kind of the chieftain. He's the inspirational leader. There's somebody who's the quartermaster, who's in charge of supplies. And then there's somebody who is the keeper of names, who is both the guy who's in charge of the roles, like who's actually in the army, as well as keeping the memories of the fallen alive. And what's really interesting about what they've done is they've essentially made it so that each of the roles has like different things that help them. So for example, the War Master really wants a large army, because a large army brings him a lot of prestige and he has the troops he needs to engage in battle. But the Quartermaster, if he can't have enough supplies to feed the army, then really bad stuff happens. And it doesn't give him benefits if he can't feed the army. And in fact, the more supplies he can keep on hand, like bonuses, he gets bonuses and stuff. But again, the War Master gets bonuses for having a larger army. And then the certain characters get benefits from being in combat and having lots of like enemies destroyed, but then the Keeper of Names has really bad stuff happen if too many people die, because the army gets sad. And it's just kind of neat how they've balanced competitive and cooperative, that you really have to think through your decisions about what's best for your character as well as what's best for the team as a whole, and try to balance those things, because you can only win collectively, but you can lose individually, if that makes sense. Each of the different missions has sort of a different win condition. And so you can only win by meeting the win condition as a team, but a lot of those win conditions end up being that individual players have to have certain things happen. So if not all of your team accomplishes their goals, you can still lose. I enjoy it. There's definitely a few issues with it, but I've had a lot of fun playing it. I think the biggest issue is replayability. Anyway, I enjoy it, and it's fun to have the miniatures for the game. And as I said, the world building is so cool. I love the world that it's set in, that I would kill for a role-playing guide that has it ready, has a character generation system, has rules for doing the role play similar to how the combat works in the video game itself. It's got a very innovative combat system in the video game. So the way combat works is nothing's based on die rolls. It's all just based on comparison of stats. So you have a strength stat. Every guy has a strength stat, an armor stat, and a willpower stat. And to do damage, you compare your strength to the opponent's armor, subtract them, and if your strength is higher than his armor, whatever the difference is how much damage you do, and you do that damage to the person's strength. So then you weaken them and they have a harder time hurting other people. But you can attack their strength or you can attack their armor, so the extra damage you do can either go to the armor or it can go to the strength of the guy you're fighting. So one of the strategies is, especially on the big guys, is you have to whittle down their armor first before you attack their strength. And so there's all sorts of like strategic decisions you have to try to make to win each game. So the combat's a little bit more like a puzzle that you have to solve, which is fun. Oh, cool! You actually did the link for my guys. Yeah, they still sell the miniatures, I believe, though. I think you can buy the board game and you can also buy the miniatures separately. The miniatures don't come with the board game. You have to buy them separately. I believe they're still on sale. One of the coolest miniatures that the game has is, you know what, I'm going to go grab it because I'm getting myself all excited. So here's the banner guy I was talking about. So he's the Thane. He's one of the characters that you can be. Or I guess he's your first lieutenant. So you have a right-hand man who goes and fights battles for you. And so on the actual combat, how these guys do benefits you within the combat. So this is the guy who painted the Banner Saga logo on the thing. This is one of the dredge models. They're kind of the key antagonists in the game and in the board game and the video game. So you can sort of see the size difference of the big dredge guys. But then my favorite miniature is Bellower, who is one of the key bosses that you fight in the first game, and then he's making a reappearance later in the series. But this is Bellower. You can see he's holding a human, and there's a human dead at his feet. So you can kind of get a sense for how large this model is. So he's super cool. I'll paint him up one of these days, but just awesome. Thanks. Yeah, the purple. Again, I tried to paint them exactly. They have cards in the game, and so the card has all their information and it has a drawing of them. So I tried to paint them exactly how they look on the cards, including how they did the shading and highlighting and stuff. I tried to really mimic exactly what they look like just for fun. Pretty sure I got that purple shade by adding a little bit of black to purple, which will kind of desaturate it a little bit. So if you want one of those deep purples that's not super bright. You can try adding just a little touch of black. You can even go a little bit farther, like so it starts to not look too purple. And then you can add a little white into it and it'll be like a dark grayish purple. But just play around with that. I haven't had any gaming group so we've played Banner Saga 3 times, but each of the 3 times I was playing with people who had never played it before, so we were doing some of the earlier, easier missions. I've never had any group who's tried to do the version where you fight Bellower at the end. I think that will be interesting because his rules make him seem like he's going to be super hard to beat in the board game. Just like he's pretty hard to beat in the video game too. Although there was kind of a little controversy, I think about a year ago, after they released the second Banner Saga game. They ended up going back and doing a patch and making the Bellower fight in Banner Saga 1 easier. Because from their own stats, they were seeing that a lot of people were not completing that fight and then just abandoning the game and not ever finishing it. So they made the fight a little bit easier. Then, of course, the purists were mad. They're like, it should be hard. It's the final boss. But everybody's always going to complain about something, I guess. There's been this weird bird in our yard this morning. I don't think I've ever seen one before. He's got a very interesting call. And he's trying to eat the lizards that are normally hanging out back on that wall. And I really don't want him to eat those lizards. Pizza is here. Yeah, nice. I agree. I didn't mind. I think when I played the game, even on replays and stuff, I think it still takes me usually a couple, like at least maybe 5 or 6. Well, I don't think I've played through the first game since they changed the difficulty level. But I remember it used to take me 5 or 6 times to beat the final boss. Even kind of knowing the basic strategy, you gotta sort of re-familiarize yourself and then toggle your team a little bit to different different configurations and different precise starting places to be able to make it all work. It's a fun puzzle. So you saw me do this on the other model, but I'm just painting the bottom with flat black. Just gives it a nice finish down there. It's going to kind of make it disappear. Scale 75 flat black is awesome because it dries totally matte and it really just disappears from the eye when it's down in the shadows. I'm going to be mounting these guys on black plinths. I could grab those and show you. I got them painted a little bit ago, like a week or two ago. And then I got them varnished, at least the gloss varnish. I'm not going to do the protective gloss varnish. I'm just going to do the dull coat on the models themselves since they're just for display. But I went ahead and did the gloss coat on the plinths because I figured those would be what's going to get handled. And so I'll have those be a little more protected. I'm going to glue the models onto them and then I'm going to dull coat everything so currently the plinths are shiny. So here's an example of how they're going to look. They're about the same size, a little taller, but in terms of diameter, they're about the same size as the wood that they're attached to. So anyway, that's what they're going to be mounted on. Okay, so I'm just going to use the I'm going to start with anthracite gray, actually. Now, these are pretty much going to be the same colors I do on the axe, so I could wait until I have the colors mixed up for the axe, but I'm going to waste paint instead because I just want to finish this one model, get him totally done, and then focus on the other model. So recently my wife went on a high protein, low carb diet, which for those of you out there who are married means that I am also on a high protein, low carb diet, which is not too bad. But the biggest thing is that we have not been keeping beer in the house, and it's been a few weeks, and that kind of makes me a little sad. On the plus side, whenever we do this, whenever we stop having beer in the house, I always start losing weight when I stop drinking beer. So that's not a bad thing, I guess. Beer is liquid bread. Yep. No carb and low carb. Yeah, the keto diet, I think that's the one that she's trying to do, at least, like, mostly. I mean, I think there's extreme versions of it where it's like you just have 0 carbs or 2 grams of carbs per day or something. I think she's trying to keep her net carbs to like below 15 every day. I think that's what she's trying to do for us. I cheat a little bit more than her because, like, I like to have an English muffin with my breakfast, so I do that. I also drink protein shakes for when I work out, and those have a little bit of carbs in them. So I cheat a little bit more than she does, but the beer is the big thing that usually just makes a huge difference for me. Because, you know, if you drink, say, 10 beers in a week, which is probably about average for what I would do, and each one of those is about 200 calories. That's your 2,000 calories, which is, I think they say basically if you cut your caloric intake by 1,500 calories per week, you lose about a pound a week, something like that. That's usually about right. Once I stop drinking beer for a while, I start losing a pound or 2 a week until I get down to like my, I wouldn't say ideal, but kind of the weight I'll balance at when I am eating better. Usually about 195 pounds or so. And then when I'm drinking beer, I get up to like 200, 205. And then end up usually balancing out right around there. I don't know what that is in kilograms for those of you who don't use the stupid English system like we do. Or imperial, whatever it's called. So I'm just using graphite for this next layer. For the buttons, like the larger buttons, I'm just kind of painting the top half, leaving the bottom half the darker color. For the little smaller pegs, I'm just basically hitting them with the graphite. That's about as bright as I'm going to make them go. I'm not going to do the final color for them. Actually, maybe I will. They're a lot brighter on the previous models I did. In that case, I don't actually have to hit them with this color at all. They're so small. Yeah, it's good. It's about half. Yeah, I think it's like something like 2.2 kilograms per pound, something like that. So if you divide by 2.2, it'll be a little less than half. So maybe like 90-ish kilograms, roughly. I'm not sure if that makes sense. Actually, it's probably even lower, like 80. I don't know. I could bust out a calculator real fast, but I'm not entirely sure that that's the correct conversion. It's kind of funny that America is one of the only places in the world left that uses the imperial or English measurement system. Even the British, who we got it from, are like, yeah, that's a silly way to measure things. Like, we're going to go to the metric system. All right, so let's do Nakar. It's a little bit of white. I'm going to skip the just straight Nakar step because these are too small of regions to really have that step matter. Just kind of painting the top edge. I'm going to do one last pass with white and do a like a little dot of extreme highlight on the bigger buttons. Normally I would probably make these little dots that I'm doing right now not quite as bright, but on the reference pictures they're actually fairly bright. Nice, 90 kilos. I was awesome. What a accurate mental calculation. Yeah, you had mentioned that, Heath, that you had lost a lot of weight recently. That's really awesome, man. It's important to take care of yourself. I'm glad some of your health issues are clearing up. I've got a brother-in-law who is pretty overweight and had a big health scare in this last year. And hasn't really changed much about his diet, and he is really doesn't eat well. Drinks tons of soda, doesn't exercise, doesn't really take care of himself very much. I know his wife is pretty worried about him. Yeah, keeping the same habits is certainly easier. But I don't know. I worry about him too. You can't live somebody else's life for him though. All right. And a little bit of white to finish it off. So I'm just going to hit like just kind of the top center of each of the larger buttons. Just a little bit of a reflection point. Kind of hit the corners of the buckles, at least where it makes sense to do so. It's starting to get really hard to tell the difference between the one that's done and the one that's not done yet. I keep picking up the done version of this guy. Almost putting paint on him. All right, so basically this guy is done. Again, except for the face paint if we decide to do that. The only little detail is he's got these like ties in his hair. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some Dubai Brown. I'm going to paint those. And I really don't want these to get like kind of too out of control with highlighting and shading and all that stuff. They're such a small little part of the model. And I kind of just want them to almost disappear into his hair. But I will take just a touch of this white that we were just using. Mix up a little bit of a lighter color of that, and I'll just hit the edges just to give it a little depth, but without getting too crazy. Just make this one pass. Sneak up on the color. And I think we're done with this guy. So within these videos, you've at the very least, you've got the entire start to finish of the Celtic Clan Chief model. Pretty good, I'd say. All right, I'm sure that I will still be, oh, not nap time for you, nap time for your kid maybe? Or maybe it's nap time for you, I don't know. I was gonna say, even if you go take a nap, I'm sure I'll still be painting when you get back. Gotta finish these guys. They are going in the hands of the owner of Broken Egg Games tomorrow, who's taking them to Gen Con along with a large chunk of the remaining busts to try to sell them there at Gen Con and maybe sell these painted versions. So, nope, not wrapping up. I got a ways to go. So keep them separate. So that is the original one I painted. So on to the finishing touches of Mr. Hamish. So I'm going to go ahead and do the eyes. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to use so when you're doing smaller scale models, doing the white is fine. Like you can just paint white for the white parts of the eye. But for larger scale miniatures, the white is going to really stand out and become intense, a little too intense. So you want to use, it's a tip I learned from Trent on Twitter. You want to use a light gray actually. So I'm going to use winter gray, which maybe looks a little darker than what you might think you'd want to use for this. But considering that other things are going to be pretty dark right around the eye, this ends up reading as white relative to everything else. So just very carefully try to fill in the eye with gray. I might have spoke too soon. That might not have been the gray I used. That is a little bit dark. Of course, I guess the last time I did it, I glazed it over the white, which might have made a little difference. I'm going to lighten that a little bit. Sorry. Yeah, this is better. Now you can do colored irises. He doesn't have his eyes open very wide, so I ended up just going with black pupils. I didn't do the colored like I did on this guy who's got blue eyes. So I'm just going to go ahead and do black for this. Essentially the only difference if you decide to do the colored is you kind of start with a darker version of the color you're looking for and do the spots where the iris and pupil are. Then you go with a little bit lighter just inside of that, put a little black dot in the center and then a little white dot for the reflection. We're just going to do the black and then the white dot. One thing that people do that makes their eyes look unnatural is that they actually do a dot and they make it look circular in the middle of the eye. And what that makes it look like is it looks like the guy is just like shocked, like has his eyes super wide open. Because if you just look at most people, most people's eyes, when they kind of have them open at a normal amount, you don't really see the top and the bottom of the circular part in the middle of the eye. So what you really want to do is just more kind of paint a thick vertical bar that goes through the eye. You can give a little bit of roundness if you want, but for the most part, it's just kind of a bar. And then from there, it's important to get the thickness the same on both sides. The human eye is great at picking out symmetry. And so if it looks at something that's not symmetric, it really stands out. So people looking at your models, if the eyes are not the same width, they'll know it. So it's pretty close. One thing that I know when I was working on this model for the other version, the sculptor, like the eyes are not quite, themselves are not quite the same size on the two sides. Like one is slightly more open and I think one is slightly wider. So it's a little bit trickier on this model. But before I do the final touch-ups, I'm actually gonna outline the eye. And that'll help to see how even we are. Because right now he's got black on like the eyelids and stuff. So I'm gonna use Indian Shadow, which is a dark red. You know, right around your eyes, you tend to have a lot of dark red. So this makes a good liner for outlining eyes. And sometimes on smaller models, you can use black for this. I usually find that dark reds work better. Unless you're trying to go for a look like the model has eyeliner or something. So if you recall way back in getting the models ready, and I showed you how to paint the eyes beforehand, and then I also said I would show you how to paint them afterwards on one of the models. So this is that step. And you can see that when you do it afterwards, like you kind of have to be more careful because you've already got the face totally done and exactly how you want it. Now if you get anything on the face, you have to fix it. Whereas beforehand, it's easier to paint the eye and not have to worry about that. The downside is that you then have to be really careful with the eye as you're painting. Since the eye's done and it's a recessed area, so paint's going to want to run into it. Don't worry if you make a little mistake. Corrections are just a natural part of this process, so. Gonna spend some time going back and forth. You can really start to see that this eye is a little wider than the other one, which makes it a little difficult to make it look perfectly balanced, but it's not too bad. And we're going to finish up with just a little reflection dot. I tend to try to get this, you want to get it on the black part. But not necessarily right in the middle. There you go. All right. It's pretty cool how finishing the faces just really is like finishing the eyes and stuff is a really paint drying too. Yeah, paint drying. Like finishing those eyes just really starts to make the model come to life. I love that. All right, so here we have the blonde Hamish, which is great if you were just going for a blonde bust. You want this guy to look blonde. He doesn't look too bad in my opinion. However, this is not what the actor looks like. This is modeled after. So we got some glazing to do, so buckle your seat belts. This is gonna take a little bit. All right. So for his hair, we start the glazing the same place we started with the other guy. We start with the Rot Braun. Oh, sorry, Rot Braun Red. Actually, for some reason, I forgot that I at least went up this far the same. I could have done this part the other night, but... You know what's funny? I didn't quite... So Heath said, buckled, with asterisks around it. I was like, what's he talking about? And then I remember that I was the one who said that you need to buckle your safety belts. I had already forgotten. So for the most part, this is just a tinting step. I'm not really worrying too much about the direction of my brush strokes because I'm just trying to start tinting the colors below into the red-brown color. I've also said this before, but if you're trying these techniques, try experimenting with how thick you make your glaze for this. The thicker it is, the fewer passes you need to make. But the more drastic every pass is in terms of the color shift it creates and how much it hides the layers you've built up below. I always tend to err a little on the side of thinner and using more passes, just because I like the ability to have more control over when I start and stop each color. But you might find that you like a little thicker and just do one pass for each color. What I'm also going to do while I'm doing the hair, I'm going to start working on the wood for the weapon, just because that way I can go back and forth while things are drying. So it's based in Dubai Brown. This might not need saying at this point if you've been painting along the whole time, but you'll notice that I very, very rarely ever paint with paint that comes straight out of a bottle. The sole exception is if I'm just kind of edging something or putting a little dot where, having the thicker paint is really good. But the first step once I get the paint out almost every time is to add water. You just don't typically want to paint with stuff straight out of the bottle. It's too thick. Unless you're using some kind of airbrush paints or something, even with a brush, you can just paint those right out of the bottle. But most paint is too thick. What happens with thick paint is you get two potential problems. The thick paint will collect in little crevices and recesses and stuff, and it'll start hiding your detail. And it can, even as it dries, when it gets really like thick in certain areas, it can pull apart and leave little cracks. But it can also dry with brush strokes showing, which is usually not what you're looking to do. I don't remember what this color looks like. Here we go. So next up for the axe is to use black earth brown. So this is kind of a very, very light brown. Almost like a dark flesh color, really. Dark Caucasian flesh tone. Like something you might use to base like skin with. So what we're going to do on the axe is we're going to start to establish the wood grain. So what I like to do is start off by picking where I want to have my my knots. So I think I'm just going to put one knot right there. And be okay if I don't have any other knots. So that'll be my knot. And then wood grain tends to move around a knot, kind of forming sort of a path that goes around the knot. so. And once you've established that, just kind of, fill in some filling around that. Back to the X. Now we switch to SS Camo Yellow Sand. So we've used this color before. It's a little khaki with a little bit of a yellow tone in it. And we're gonna kind of follow the same wood grain pattern. But we're gonna essentially highlight the grain. Try to make these lines mostly follow the lines before. They don't have to be perfect. Wood grain is a natural substance. It kind of just does its own thing. It's got all sorts of little subtle colors and things in it, so different textures. If you don't get it perfect, it's okay. Try to follow the same general pattern. One of the things too, this might help at your shading step, so you don't have to take these brighter highlights down into the shaded area. You won't have to cover those up later with darker colors to make it look convincing. to the hair. So we did the Rot Brawn red. I think I'm done with that. We're going to switch over to Rot Brawn, if I can find it. So this is a little bit less red, but still it's kind of a medium tone brown. It looks a little redder on screen than it is in person, but all right, so now we're moving into the shading passes. So as we do that, start paying more attention to your brush strokes. Move those brush strokes into the spots you want to be darker and away from the highlight spots. By the way, one of the reasons I could have just grabbed a clean palette and worked on the same palette, but mentally when I switch back and forth, it helps me to kind of reorient to what I'm doing, but also keeps me from using the wrong paint on the wrong part of the model. So this is Birch, and this is like our extreme highlight for the Woodgrain, and I'm going to use it somewhat sparingly, and I'm going to keep it to where the brightest parts of the wood are. And then grab a little black. So the key part of using the black here is to establish the darker color of the knot. You could use a really dark brown for this if you want. I kind of like to use black. We're going to glaze over it anyway. It'll shift a little towards the brown, but use a dark brown or black. I also like to go in with black and do a little bit of graining with black, because again, this wood natural substance that we get has all sorts of just interesting little characteristics. different colors creep in, you get different intensities of the color. So adding in a little black helps to give it some depth, visual interest, visual texture, whatever you want to call it. And sometimes you get a lot of black on there. That's all right. It's going to be shadowed anyway. All right. He's putting up a picture for reference of different, I'm guessing different wood texture. I'm actually going to check out that picture and then maybe pull it up on stream. Plan B, we'll use this. I was trying to bring it up on my phone so I didn't have to move my iPad, but so you can just see all the different variation in color you can get in the wood grain. And so while you're not trying to create this exact look, I mean, it's really hard to replicate the complexity of a natural thing. You just want to, capture a little bit of that variation in texture and colors and tones. Especially as you start to get to the larger scale miniatures like this, where the wood is a little bit larger and more prominent. It helps it to read as wood more accurately. So for the hair, the next shading pass will be Dubai Brown. Exactly. You just kind of want to trick the brain into seeing what it expects to see, and then it fills in the rest itself. It's a good way to put it. I was reading a book a month or two ago. And as part of the book, it was talking a little bit about, actually, you know what? Well, a little bit of it was in the book. A little bit of it was on a like a podcast or an article or something I was reading, but talking about how the human brain tricks you. First of all, you probably know this, but the optical nerve in the back of your eye covers up a part of your retina. Like where the nerves attach, there's no receptor cells there. So you really actually have a permanent blind spot in each eye that you can't see in. But your brain just like kind of automatically fills in what it thinks you should be seeing right there, so that you're constantly being tricked into seeing things that you're not actually seeing and where those blind spots are, which is really wonky. And you'd think that, the common wisdom might be, well, it's just using the information from the other eye to fill in. But that's not actually the case. I mean, maybe a little bit the case, but if you cover one of your eyes, you still don't see the blind spot. Your brain still just kind of fills in all the stuff that's missing, and so you don't see your blind spot. It's really crazy. But what I was reading that I didn't know is that while your eyes are in motion, they can't focus on anything. So as your eyes dart around, if you're reading and you're moving your eyes along the lines of the page or whatever, anytime your eyes are moving, they're not focused. They're not actually seeing anything. And if that's the case, think about what percentage of the time your eyes are actually in motion, scanning your surroundings and things. You'd constantly be switching back and forth between blurry and not blurry and blurry and not blurry. But you don't perceptually notice any of that. And what your brain does is, like when your eyes move, it basically kind of stops sending you the conscious signal of what your eyes are seeing, and it just fills in the intermediate time with whatever it was seeing at the beginning of the movement into that space of time. So when you move your eyes, your brain basically says, like, stop recording, fill in with the last thing you saw, and now start seeing whatever your eyes are seeing now. You don't even notice that it's doing this, but it's doing this to you. It's just crazy. What are some of the other things that it does? Oh, like signals reach you at different times. Your brain processes signals at different speeds, like your sense of touch, your sense of sound, your sense of sight. It processes all of those signals differently yeah, exactly. It's almost all the time it's like doing that, because you're constantly moving your eyes around. So you're sort of almost like taking little pictures, and it's like playing the picture for a short period of time rather than really a real-time video feed, which is how we usually think about what our eyes are doing for us. But the other thing, to synchronize things like if I'm tapping on the table, hearing the sound, seeing the tap, and then also the feel of it on me. The brain like delays your processing of or you process those signals, but your conscious awareness of them, it like delays them so they synchronize in your conscious memory instead of being like microseconds off like they would normally actually be, because of how different speeds are processed. And that's also the same with if you see like down the street, you see somebody close their car door, and you know that light travels faster than sound. So really you should notice the ever so slight difference in the time that the visual sight of the door slam comes to you and the sound of it. Well, your brain has like a processing gap of like 15 microseconds or 30, whatever the gap is. And as long as the sound arrives within that amount of time of the visual event, it will assume that they were supposed to be synchronized and synchronize them for you for when it comes into your conscious awareness. And then if if the object is far enough away that the sound doesn't arrive in that little processing window, that's when you actually see them separate, because your brain says, well, those must not have been correlated, and therefore like they're different events. And so that's when you can, if the object's far enough away, that's when you do get the gap between what you see and what you hear. But it has to take that much longer for the sound to get to you, for your brain to not synchronize them. It's just, yeah, the brains are essentially just constantly working overtime as video editors in your head. Anyway, those are the ones I can remember off the top of my head, but there's even more stuff that it's just wild what our brains are doing without us being aware of it. All right, so I have a mixture here of Dubai brown and brown leather. This is going to be my wood color. You can see it's a nice rich brown. It's got a little bit of a red tint to it. That's the brown leather. That brown leather color is a red leather. I'm sure she recommends the book Brain Bugs, How the Brain's Flaws Shape Our Lives. I'm sure there's tons of that stuff in that book. The other, where I was reading it, was more to make a point about like trusting perception and things like that. But I am going to write that book down right now. I love reading about stuff like that. It's kind of funny, changes over the course of my life. I used to read tons of science fiction and fantasy. I would say in the last 5 years or so, I'm just finding it harder and harder to really enjoy a lot of fiction. I still have some series that I read and some authors that I read, but I'm kind of shifting more and more to reading these kinds of nonfiction books about, how the brain works, or social psychology issues, or interesting things about history. I'm finding myself spending more of my time reading that stuff. All right, so that's a tinting layer. We'll probably come back and do some more of that. I'm going to add a little bit of a black, well, maybe one more pass with the Dubai brown. A little scary read about how easily manipulated we are, she said. Well, the first step to trying to be aware of that, or the first step is to try to be aware of that, and then I think you can probably overcome some of that. We still react a lot to emotional triggers and things. I don't think you can ever fully kind of deprogram how your brain is influencing you, but at least being aware helps some. So I just added a little black to that Dubai brown. This will actually be the last shading color we do for him. Might make another pass, but we won't mix up any more colors. I always like to reflect back on where this started. So if you remember how he looked as the blonde warrior. Definitely doesn't look like that anymore. Actually, I think I'm pretty happy with where he's at. There's just going to be one more thing to do. Yeah, how badly flawed our memory is also true. And what's interesting is whenever you access memories, they go back through like the processing part of your brain, and when they are sort of like resaved away after you've accessed them, they can actually kind of change every single time. And so like things that you've experienced between now and the memory that you're recalling can actually influence how the memory is sort of resaved for you, which is what happens over time. Like you can actually have memories that adapt and get changed. Back to our wood. Now sometimes, you might want to be more subtle with the glaze for your wood. Keep a little bit more of the wood grain texture in the forefront. For this particular model, you'll see that well, I'm going to end up doing a little glazing to bring out some of that, but or maybe whatever. Sometimes you want the glaze, the wood grain to be more prominent than elsewhere. I mean, if you're thinking about a well-worn axe handle, this guy's been carrying this thing around, fighting with it. Things tend to get worn a little smooth. If it's oiled at all, it's going to be a little less prominent than like if you're looking at maybe some raw wood or something like that. You can just kind of depends on the look you're going for. So I'm going to start applying the glaze more selectively now into the recesses. And I'll come back and add a little black to that to finish everything off. But let's go back and do the last part of his hair. And I'm going to take the color take peanut butter. This is kind of a orange blonde color. Kind of looks like peanut butter. Although I think it's a little more orange than peanut butter is. It looks more like like really freshly squeezed orange juice that hasn't really been processed to me. Anyway, I'm going to take this, and if you look closely at the actor, the reference pictures I have up here aren't the greatest for this particular part of the model, but he's got some of this like orangish blonde hair in his beard. And it's most prominent sort of kind of near the top of the beard area and into his mustache. So I'm just going to apply it in that region there. Add a little bit of color. Why would you paint with peanut butter? Sometimes you want your models to be good enough to eat. Probably pretty good. I think I'm pretty happy with that. A little more peanut butter. And call that good for that part. All right. Oh, back is hurting. All right, let's take stock of where we're at on this guy. So I know there's two places I need to touch up. I missed the shirt on his shoulders because I was being silly and neglectful. He's got the little streamers in his hair that we need to do. I missed his lower lip when I was doing the hair, or the skin, and we have to do his axe head. So that's what's left to do on him, and then again we'll do the face paint if I can still get the guts up to do that. Yeah, exactly. So Heath was saying in his beard he's got blonde, light brown, dark brown, black, and red. I really feel like people's beards have a way bigger variety of color in them than the actual head on top of the hair on top of their head. I know I can't grow a beard. I can grow like maybe 1/4 inch stubble that comes out, but even mine has it has way more gray and white and blonde and some reddish blonde. It has like lots of different things in it, whereas the hair on top of my head is a little bit more uniform in color and hasn't started going quite as gray. I think it's, you know, the not having kids thing that's kept me a little bit younger looking as I've gotten older. There's quite a few people that don't believe that I'm almost 40. power of getting good nights of sleep. Well, as good a night of sleep as you can. So all I did was I just used the basic flesh to outline his lip, and then I'm just going to glaze over it with the pink flesh. I'm not going to do the whole full process with that lower lip. We showed you how to do the shirt before, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. I'm just going to try to quickly fix my mistake here. I was trying to remember which colors these were. This is essentially close to the glaze we used, so should serve fine. I knew one of these had brown leather in it. I was trying to remember which palette had that in it. This should be. And while that dries, pink flesh. All right, thanks for stopping by, Lena. It was really good to see you, virtually see you again. Hopefully you can make a stream in the future. Maybe I'll try to do a little bit more streams on off my normal times, maybe some more Saturday streams. But yes, say hi to the family. Have a good one. Just a touch of Indian shadow to this. All right, I think we've successfully fixed our mistakes, which just leaves the things in his hair and the axe head.